Hi, so my name is Kimberly Stewart Lucas of Warrior Mamas and Absolute Divine Events, and this is another episode of Dish with the Doulas. I am honored and excited to have a friend of mine joining me today, the lovely Kwajelyn Jackson, who is the Executive Director of the Feminist Women's Health Center. Thank you for being with me, Kwajelyn.
Sure, it's absolutely my pleasure. I'm happy to do it.
Thank you, thank you. So what's interesting is you were actually the first person I spoke to when I started talking about doing season 2. And it was probably days before, I don't know if it was shelter in place, but it was days before things just kind of happened.
That's right. That's right.
And I wanted you originally to be the second episode. You are the 5th episode. It just took a little time, and just life, a lot of life has happened the last couple of months. A lot of life.
For sure.
We are here. And first, I want to share this. What I think about you. So I don't even know when we first met, however many years ago. But what I think about you, that you are probably one of the most stylish and fashionable women I know. I'll get the aesthetics out the way, because I remember what I'm wearing today. Is that what it's called? What I'm wearing today. You are one of the most passionate women I know when it comes to fighting for and standing firm in what you believe. And one of the strongest women I know, because of what you manage and do. I know that takes a lot of wherewithal to maintain that and to live that. And when I was doing my prep for our interview today, it dawned on me that I admire you because of who you are, but you also remind me of my sister friend Jamila, who passed away 11 years ago. Wow. And that's who Sophia is, her Sophia Jamila. And she was a fighter for us, for Black women, for Black people, for women. I met her at Georgia State, and I knew what was going down because of her. I was aware of things that I probably should have been aware of already, but she was the connector for me, and that's who you've been. You have informed, you fight for us. You stand in the gaps for us, and I honor you, and I'm glad that you are here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind.
So, get together. Again, you are the Executive Director of the Feminist Women's Health Center, and I know you've been with them since 2013. Mm-hmm. Explain to me, one, how you kind of came into the work, and then what led you to becoming the Executive Director.
Sure. Well, it's definitely not a straight line that brought me to where I am today. What I often sort of trace the maybe like core of it is a combination of my mother and my mother's work and my sort of grounding at Spelman College. So the intersection of those two places. So my mother had always worked in social justice. She, for a very long time, was teaching sort of like anti-oppression for young people, doing like residential week-long intensives with young people all across St. Louis, talking about not just racial justice, but homophobia and sexism and different ways that power, privilege, and oppression like impact the way we like live and work in the world. Mm-hmm. But then ultimately she became the vice president of diversity and education at Planned Parenthood in St. Louis. Okay. And she was doing that while I was in my later years of college and after I finished college. And so that was the place where reproductive rights and reproductive justice started to cement in for her. And while I was at Spelman, my major was economics. I was not centrally focused on like women's studies like a lot of my classmates, but you can't really actually work through Spelman without getting that Black feminist. Yeah, it's very seeped in and intentional. So that Black feminist perspective and foundation was also like seeped into me. So I did a lot of stuff after graduating. I worked in banking for 9 years. I left banking. I was working for the commercial banking, and I started doing organizing and volunteer management at Wonderroot, which
That's when I met you.
Yes,
That's
that's when we met. And you know, for your Atlanta listeners, they may know about sort of like the rise and fall of Wonderroot over that period of time. But that was the time where I really started to get more connected with organizations that were doing movement building, organizing, progressive work, because Wonderroot was like a hub for both art making, but also for social change.
That's it. Yeah, exactly.
And so it was really like another thing that sort of crystallized was like using art, all kinds of art as a tool or a lens to explore and unpack and shift perspectives on like really complicated issues. So while I was at Wonderroot, Feminist Women's Health Center had an abortion speak out in our basement performance space, and Spark Reproductive Justice Now had a photography exhibit as a part of their Fire Media Camp. And so there were organizations like those that I got to know because they were coming into Wonderroot and being connected in like using art as a medium to bring forward these bigger issues. So when I left Wonderroot, a friend of mine who was at Project South was like, this job description came forward from Feminist Women's Health Center for a volunteer coordinator. And I think it's perfect for you because it brings together these things that I know you care about or that are in you. And that's really where it started. So I started as a volunteer coordinator, doing like training for volunteer orientations for our folks, doing a lot of like tabling at events like Pride or Inman Park Festival or things like that, doing speaking engagements and doing workshops at universities and, you know, working with folks to sort of get them engaged. That was my first time going to the state capitol, learning about the legislative process, learning a lot more about how, you know, a bill becomes a law, just like Schoolhouse Rock tried to teach us, but really watching it in real time, watching how, you know, ineffective sometimes our leadership can be, and then connecting that.
I like that. Thank you.
Yeah, like, well, and then also seeing how, like, what's happening in the Capitol, how so many of, you know, folks in the community don't have any sense of how they're being discussed, how their lives are being like directly impacted without their input. And then following that train to, you know, civic engagement, getting folks registered to vote, helping folks understand like who are the people who are making decisions on your behalf.
Who are the people in your neighborhood?
I mean, really.
that are representing your neighborhood.
That are representing your neighborhood.
Yep.
And trying to encourage people to take ownership of that, you know. So anyway, those were sort of the things that I learned in the very beginnings of my time at Feminist Center. The other sort of like, I don't know, kismet of it all is that when I was in banking, I got my master's degree in public policy.
Oh, wow.
As just sort of a happenstance. Like I was focused on urban policy and economic development because that was sort of aligned with my work. But that sort of like just narrow thread connecting to advocacy and sort of legislation, like it really was like things came together. You know, you don't know what you're being prepared for. And so you sort of use things like
together, like, wait a minute, is that?
Yeah. I mean, really, really and truly, this idea that like all things working together for your good, like that part. Yeah. So essentially, I started as this volunteer coordinator. I shifted up to our community education and advocacy director. So that sort of like zoomed out to include our community-based programs and just sort of thinking about our larger partnerships, our coalition building, both locally and nationally. So I did that for several years. And in 2017, our executive director at the time retired.
Mm-hmm.
And so 2018, I started the year as a co-director.
Mm-hmm.
There were some leadership changes and I became the interim director.
Mm-hmm.
And then by September, by September of that year, I was made permanent executive director. So officially since September of 2018, I've been executive director of the organization. So that really stretched my, I had to learn about the clinic and the clinical operations in a very different way.
Mm-hmm.
I had to sort of like get behind the curtain and look at the finances and the organizational structure, our hiring practices, our policies, work more closely with the board. So it really shifted to an administrative position. But the other thing, just going back to this idea of like all things working together, because I was an economics major and I'd worked in banking, hand me a budget and watch me work sort of thing. And so it was like that, having that skill set.
I don't even drink beer, but hold my tea if you don't drink beer.
Yes, hold my herbal tea.
Hold my herbal tea, please. Let me show you what I can do.
Well, there are a lot of people who are deeply passionate about an issue and rise to a level of leadership, but we're not all skilled in all the areas. So like some folks, like their highest and best self is operations. Mm-hmm. Some folks, their highest and best self is fundraising. Sometimes their highest and best self is, sort of like the public face and voice. Mm-hmm. And so being able to have that, like, this much financial background, so I could pay attention to how to like maintain our operations and like work to grow, and adding levels of sort of sophistication and oversight is important because we're a big organization and I wanted to make sure that we felt sustainable for the long term.
Yes.
So anyway, that's sort of my journey. That's how I got here.
There's some things I knew and some things I did not. And that's always what happens when we actually have a moment to talk. And we, you and I see each other often in passing at events for different film screenings and dance gatherings, but to be able to hear it from your mouth and to know, like I said, I did some prep and read up, but thank you for making that connection. So we're talking about the Feminist Women's Health Center, located here in Atlanta. And I became familiar with it, 2014 maybe.
Okay.
I have been a client of the Feminist Women's Health Center, and life-changing, I'll say that, and nurturing. And so when you talk about providing safe and accessible and compassionate services, yes, because that's how I felt.
Thank you.
So I know that of what you all provide, there are the clinical services, there are the abortion services, and then the sexual health and wellness. Can you share some things about what your center provides for those?
Sure, absolutely. So I'll start by saying that we have been providing care in Atlanta since 1976. Mm-hmm. So very shortly after.
So it's 43 years of resilience. On the PDF it says 41. I was like, it's 43 because I'm 76er.
yeah, it's 43. That's right. That's right. So we have been providing abortion care basically since day one. Currently, we offer both medication and procedural abortion care up to 21 weeks and 6 days gestation. So 21 weeks and 6 days past your last menstrual period is the way that we measure how far we can provide services in the state of Georgia. And that, just for folks' information, that can vary all across the country. Yeah. States have different limits to which they can provide abortion care. In addition to abortion services, we also do, like you said, wellness care, gynecological care, and trans health care out of our wellness center. So that includes annual exams like pap smears, STI testing and lab work, problem visits, and hormone replacement therapy for transmasculine and intersex folks.
Mm-hmm.
We've been doing trans healthcare since about 2000, since the year 2000. So 20 years,
20 years.
Of providing trans healthcare. We function in some similar ways to what many people associate with Planned Parenthood, who's a partner organization of ours. But the majority of second trimester procedural abortion care in the country is provided by independent abortion providers like us. Mm-hmm. So meaning that we're not a part of a national federation. We're just one clinic, nonprofit, mm-hmm. Little clinic that could in our space. And there are other independent clinics in Georgia that are providing care as well. Mm-hmm. In the Southeast, again, it can vary drastically from states like Mississippi that has one clinic to a state like Georgia that has 12. Okay. And so providing abortion care is super challenging, but we are incredibly proud to be able to offer that amongst a comprehensive array of services to the community.
And, people are like, well, this is Dish with the Doulas. What are we talking? This is my focus for this season. And really, it was always in my mind, but I don't think I ever said it. Dish with the Doulas started off talking about pregnancy and birth and labor and so forth. But I know that there is a total picture of a woman, and reproductive wellness and health and justice, mm-hmm. particularly for Black women, mm-hmm. is what my focus is and where I'm going.
Yeah.
So you were the first person that I thought about, because when I think about reproductive justice, I see your face because you are on the front line. I have to say that. So for those that may never use the services, I still need to know, for people to know that having the right to be able to, whether you choose or not, is paramount. Yeah. And that right has been threatened over. And I just, especially in Georgia, I just think it's always been threatened and always been attacked and always been, what is the current, I don't say law, but law. What is currently happening in Georgia right now on this day, which is, I know people may see this months from now, but it is now May 11th, 2020. Yes. What is happening today, right now?
Yeah. I think you're exactly right. And I'll just, before I talk about the specifics of Georgia law, I'll just echo that, we definitely don't see abortion as oppositional to birth. Mm-hmm. We talk about reproductive justice as the ability to have a child, mm-hmm. the ability to not have a child, the ability to choose the circumstances under which you will be pregnant and give birth, mm-hmm. and having the dignity and bodily autonomy to be able to parent with all of the resources you need to. Mm-hmm. All of those things are connected to one another. Yes. And have the space to hold many, many issues that impact our lives. Mm-hmm. Reproductive justice is not exclusive to women. It affects all of us, but it deeply impacts the lived experiences of people of color and Black women in particular, because of all of the systemic oppression that we have experienced over generations. Mm-hmm. Reproductive justice is a key piece in our overall liberation. Exactly. I just believe that with my whole heart. Yes. So in Georgia, it's fascinating. I will say you're exactly right that, being under attack, under scrutiny, has been a constant for as long as abortion has been legal in this country. Mm-hmm. Georgia, while, we have certainly had our share of challenges, we also have had it easier than some states in the South and the Midwest. Really? Places like Texas, Ohio, Mississippi, Alabama, that get 10, 20 pieces of legislation introduced every year. It's, it feels almost untenable sometimes to maintain, and yet somehow we do. Mm-hmm. In Georgia currently, I mentioned our gestational limit. And so that is one of the main tactics that anti-abortion extremists use is to just continue to chip away at how far into a pregnancy someone could exercise their right to bodily autonomy. And currently, we're at 21.6 because in 2012, a law was passed called, it's sort of colloquially called the 20-week ban, but it's not medically accurate. But that passed in 2012, was challenged in the courts, was under an injunction for many years. The injunction was lifted, and so now we are reduced to providing services up to that point. In addition, there are laws about what information you have to give someone within the first 24 hours before they can actually have a procedure. So it's called the Women's Right to Know Act. We are required by law to tell anyone who would be seeking an abortion that child support is accessible to them, that there is a potential risk of breast cancer, though that has been debunked, that they are at risk of mental and emotional harm due to post-abortion syndrome, which is also not evidence-based. We're supposed to give them all the risks, the potential risks of abortion, which we would give them in person anyway.
If they lost.
Yes, but we have to give this over the phone at the time of appointment, no less than 24 hours before they're able to come in for care. In some states, the patient is required to come in person, receive this information, and then wait 24, 48, in some cases up to 72 hours before they're able to have their procedure. So delaying or postponing care and requiring multiple visits. Fortunately, in Georgia, they don't require multiple visits. You can receive the information over the phone or in writing. But yeah, so that's one of the pieces. We are also required by law to ask the patient if they want to see the ultrasound or listen to the heartbeat. They don't have to do it, but we have to offer. And of course, if people are interested in that, it's certainly fine. And we want to make sure people have everything they need.
Exactly.
But often it is used as a tool to shame and scare folks who have already made up their mind and are already firm in their decision. There are also laws around consent. So for minors, it differs from state to state, but in Georgia, we are a notify state, meaning that we have to have evidence that we have notified a parent or guardian before a minor can have an abortion procedure. They don't have to consent. So some other places, there has to be affirmative consent. But I will say the majority of patients that we see who are under 18 come in with a parent or guardian. It is very rare that a young person comes in for abortion care without a guardian. If they can't get it, they can go through a process called judicial bypass, which means they would appear before a judge and argue their maturity and or the circumstances that would prevent them from being able to safely inform a parent or guardian. That can be a really overwhelming process for a young person to go through on their own. There are attorneys who are sometimes able to get engaged to help young people work through that process, but they're pretty rarely granted. So we don't see judicial bypass cases very often. Trying to think about what are the other sort of big hurdles that we have legally.
What have you found with COVID-19, like specifically what's happening now? There's challenges that existed, right?
Yeah.
But what is happening now with, with restrictions and, the social distancing, and how are you managing that? How is that? It's a lot.
It's been really tough. It's been really tough. I'll be honest that.
And for it to be accessible, the services to still be accessible is a thing too.
That's the part. And that's really the core, is that we know that abortion care is essential. It is time sensitive. For many people, it is very urgent. As you wait sort of longer the cost increases. And so being able to have the abortion that you want in a timely manner is critical, even in a pandemic. At the same time, it's really important that we are able to make sure that our staff, our physicians, are safe. We want to make sure that both patients and our staff are equally protected in this moment. Because I am not willing to treat my staff as disposable. So like you talked about at the top, very shortly after we talked, I was working on COVID-19 protocols basically every single day, updating it with the new information we were getting. We made a decision by March 13th that we would remove all non-clinical employees from the building. So everybody, including me, who does not see patients is working remotely. We also began to stagger patient appointments. So essentially wanting to make sure that we had as few people in the waiting room at any given time so that we could manage social distancing. We could maintain 6-foot distance between patients as they're waiting in those places where we would normally congregate folks. So, of course, that pretty immediately splits our volume almost in half. We also, have been working to make sure that our staff have sufficient PPE and cleaning supplies. I mean, they're basically wiping down every surface after every single encounter. Every time someone touches a pen, we've got to wipe it down. I mean, it just has to be consistent. Our patients, because we do procedural abortion that can involve sedation, mild sedation, they are required to have a support person with them who can either drive them or who can accompany them. And so our support folks and our drivers are waiting in their cars so that we can, again, keep our waiting areas sparse and socially distant. We've been screening patients 3 times before they enter the building. So at the time of their initial appointment, we asked them about active symptoms and potential exposure. We asked them again at their appointment confirmation call. And then we asked them again before they're allowed to enter the building. Just so that we can try. I mean, we know asymptomatic spread is a thing, but because we are not a hospital setting, we are trying to minimize people with active fever or coughing that could sort of exacerbate the spread of contagion in our buildings. So it has been many, many, many steps. I mean, and the last thing I'll mention that's really important to me is that we worked really quickly to incorporate hazard pay for all of our staff. Again, just because we acknowledge how valuable they are and how important their willingness is to continue to provide care to the community, even if it means the potential increased risk of exposure when they cannot shelter at home. So we're very fortunate that we've only had one staff member who had a partner who exhibited symptoms. They self-quarantined, but their test resulted in negative. And so we've been working through and, are really grateful that our staff has been healthy throughout this time. We've had to take breaks. We've really tried not to close, but we've taken a couple of days off because burnout is also real.
It's exhausting. And I don't expect anything less from a leader like you because of how you care for people. And like you said, it's just, you're not willing to, put them in certain risks. So I think that is important that you have the rest. Rest is essential.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think, this big capitalistic machine that keeps this country going as it's been going, there's I have a lot of issue with this idea that people whose roles and positions have been undervalued and neglected for such a long time, partially because of how many of them are held by people of color and people who are low income are now being called heroes, but are not actually being treated as if their lives are precious.
Paid as such.
Right. And so it's not, you know, the least I can do is make sure that people are paid sufficiently, but my actual role is to make sure that they are protected.
They're protected.
And that is the part that, I mean, it's very hard. I don't have all the answers. I don't know all of it. But the narrative around who is essential and why, I feel like that's a really important conversation for us to have.
Mm-hmm.
And while I want to prioritize our patients, I'm not willing to sacrifice my employees. Excellent. There's not a competition between whose lives are more important.
And it's interesting you say that, because in healthcare, that's always been the issue, as if healthcare is a privilege, and it's not.
And it's a right.
It's a right, you know? And it just dawned on me, I don't know why, when I said this earlier, because we've had this in previous conversations, about this conversation that you and I are having. Dish with the doulas, there are all types of doulas. An abortion doula is one of them.
That's right.
And that type of doula and the care that she or he may give, again, life-changing.
That's right. That's right. I think the other thing, we have to expand the idea of like who is a provider,
Mm-hmm.
who is working in healthcare,
Mm-hmm.
and like really think about all of the people who are caregiving
Mm-hmm.
in this moment and in many other moments that we've experienced before.
Yes.
And so some of those things might take place in a hospital. Some of those might take place in a living room.
Yes.
Some of those might take place in a community center.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there are lots of ways that caregiving happens,
Mm-hmm. and
and doulas are such an important piece of that,
Mm-hmm.
And have been for centuries. Centuries.
Yeah. And so that's what I have to remember. And I'm glad while you were talking, I was like, wait a minute. We've said this before, you know, and people, you know, will relate the word doula to birth. Yes, I get it. But there are many other experiences where a doula's care is necessary.
Yeah, critical.
Critical, yes, indeed. So let me ask you this. How do I frame the question? Going forward for your center,
Mm-hmm.
is there a call to action of something you want the public to, to follow you all, to donate, to how can people assist you in what you're doing and the work that you're doing?
Sure. Well, I'll say, you know, this is true of lots of nonprofits, that in addition to our revenue being impacted by COVID-19, our
Mm-hmm.
fundraising, of course, is impacted too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, folks are not able to have in-person events
Mm-hmm.
that might make up a big part of their fundraising capacity. We're, you know, working to try to, you know, talk to foundations to see what ways we can supplement. We're looking at loans, you know,
Mm-hmm.
some of us for the first time. We are really excited about how this past Tuesday went. This past Tuesday, normally Giving Tuesday is like at the end of the year after
Mm-hmm.
Thanksgiving, but nationally, folks moved Giving Tuesday up to May 5th, and Georgia participated in Georgia Gives Day on May 5th. And we were able to raise $14,000 for our Lifting Latinx Voices initiative.
That's one of your community programs.
And so that program is a bilingual program that works with Spanish-speaking communities across the Latin diaspora to provide sexual and reproductive health education, skill building, leadership development. But in this time, we have shifted our focus to emergency mutual aid. And so for Spanish-speaking communities who have been really sort of devastated economically and financially, we are able to step in and provide assistance with food insecurity, with utility bills, with rent. And so we've raised, like I said, about $14,000 that we are able to reinvest in communities that have been hit really hard by what's happening right now.
Okay.
But that's only one piece. You know, essentially, we're trying to make sure that we don't have any layoffs or furloughs of our employees, that we can continue to offer quality care, that we can maintain the PPE and supplies that are necessary to continue to stay open. So we have a donate page on our website that's
I'm gonna
live
go there
every
right
day.
now. How about that? Look, I like this feature when I do my interviews. I'm like, ooh, let me show you what I can do. I'm gonna go and see if I get it right. Okay, there it is.
Yeah.
Here's the website, and then you go to
donate. It's right up there.
Oh, you know what? Let me move this right here. There it is. Donate.
Yeah.
I had to move the picture.
So that's a place where you can donate. You can either give, and I'll tell you, that's some of our clinical staff right there. Those are the folks, frontline workers who are seeing patients every day. And so you can give
further down
a one-time gift, or you can, give monthly if you feel like you are able. We want to make sure that we're able to do this for the long term.
Excellent. That's what we give y'all.
Yeah.
Right, one way.
We're hopeful that we'll be able to have a digital fundraiser event soon. We've done one once before. We had an online virtual event in 2018 called our Glow Up. And so we're working behind the scenes to figure out how we might be able to pull that off one more time and do something that's fun and engaging for our folks. We are also figuring out what are the ways that folks can volunteer digitally. So just so folks know, COVID or not, elections are happening. So we are also doing canvassing, digital organizing, digital movement building to make sure that folks know that in addition to the presidential election, our entire state legislature is up for re-election this year. And so people can really understand what is at stake and how they can maintain their right to vote, how they can register online, how they can get a mail-in ballot so that they don't have to go physically to the polls.
I mail-in ballot and thought that there was not going to be any in-person voting, right? So I got it and I was like, well, and look, I'll share this. I have a nonpartisan ballot. I was surprised to see all the names on there. I was like, what is happening? These are people that dropped out, and a lot of the people that dropped out, their names weren't on there. So I'm confused. What are you doing? What's happening? But did not know that I got it, and reading is fundamental. I will say that. But realize that you can go in person. But yeah, for me, for Clayton County, there are judges on there. I'd like to face. There are people that, it's to me that it's time for a different way of doing things. And I believe personally that if someone's been in office for 20 plus years, I know it depends on different things. Personally, I think it is time. Let somebody else at the helm, please.
So I will say this. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. So we do our electoral work completely nonpartisan. And as an individual person, I will also say, regardless of the letter that follows your name, it is important that you understand what the person believes in, what they stand for, and what they have done for you lately. Because there are a lot of people who are taking up space.
Yes.
Who are not actually working on our behalf to make things better for us. They are holding on to power for their own personal gain, as opposed to working on behalf of the people. And so it's critical that we understand who is up for election, what positions, and what they do. So people don't know that if you are interested and care about police brutality, you might want to know if there's a sheriff running for office in your county. If you're thinking about your schools, you might want to know what school board elections are on your ballot. Your state legislature. On other, odd numbered years, your county commission, your mayor and your city council might be on the ballot. District attorneys. So it's so important that people focus. I know that the national political sphere could take up so much of the air in the room.
People better know the street that they live on. They better know who represents that street and the main street outside that street and the street around. You better know who your local
That's right.
regional, city, and county officials are, because that affects you the most. I'm not saying the presidential is not important, because it is.
Of course,
but
it is.
where you reside and lay your head,
that's right.
You better know who's talking about the streets and the schools and the stores and businesses around where you lay your head, and you have a say in that. And you can directly have access to these people to ask them questions. They don't
absolutely. That's right.
Have these meetings and don't even put it out for notice that they're doing it. And yes, there's a level of work that you have to do to find out. It's not going to be like a knock on the door. Hey, we're having a meeting tonight. But you have to do the work if you want to see change.
That's exactly right. Because if it was not so important, they would not do so much work to prevent us from doing it.
There you go.
But, so oftentimes, I know we have shifted total gears. But
I expected that.
But oftentimes folks talk about like the Black vote as sort of like a voting block, and how we actually need to be very critical and withhold our vote. And there are folks who are, for good reasons, really disenfranchised and disenchanted with the process. However, if it wasn't critical, if it wasn't important, if it didn't have real consequence, they would not move heaven and earth to prevent us from doing it. And they have. I, often say you can draw a straight line from voter suppression to the abortion ban that passed in 2019. Like there's a very clear through line of what can be accomplished when people are prevented from having their voices acknowledged. So we have to show up.
And show out.
And the other part is, when we have candidates who are not worth a quarter, we have to encourage community leaders to run. We have to rise up and say, actually, I can do a better job than they can. And I'm going to throw my hat in the ring because I know my people. I know the needs of the people around me. So I am willing to advocate for that.
Cannon? Is that her name?
Park Cannon.
Park Cannon. That's who I just saw.
Who was,
you said that.
Yeah. Who was a former intern at Feminist Women's Health Center.
Really? I didn't know that.
She was an intern at Feminist Women's Health Center in 2013. She worked in the clinic as a health advocate and patient care technician in the surgical suite before she ran for office. And she was one who, she cut her chops. She became an activist at a very young age, and she was asked to run. And she said, I will give it a try. And look at what she's been able to accomplish in this short amount of time, because she is in a relationship with the people that she represents.
Yes, that is everything. We were talking about the state capitol. My son one time he was chosen as a page to be part of the page program from his school. And so, Yada and I went and were there with him. And to look to see what happens on that floor in the House of Representatives, I was partly embarrassed.
It's wild.
Because I'm like, are his feet on the desk? Are they talking while their bills being passed? Are they sharing pictures? Are they laughing? And like, what is happening? It was, and there's some things going on. I'm not going to say that everybody that's there is not doing what they're, but I was.
Tell the truth.
Lord, pun intended, to see what was going on in session.
Yes.
Like, is this how laws are made about us?
Yes.
This is outrageous. I think everybody needs to go take a visit. Once we get, I'm not sure what the laws are now, what the restrictions are. I think everybody needs to take a couple of hours and just look to see how laws are made in their state.
Absolutely.
And I think you have a different approach to who's on that floor, how they got there, and how to get them off.
That's right. 100%. You're exactly right. It's appalling. It's appalling.
Like, it can't be it. This can't be how things are done. And it has been. It has been. So that'll be a whole other show.
Yeah, that was gonna say we can go to a whole other show.
But it's connected because it's the laws. It's how things come together that affect us, and things that we don't want. We're like, well, how did this happen? Well, because this is happening.
Yeah. So when we talked about the laws in Georgia, I neglected to talk about the most recent law. Actually, it just sort of even slipped my mind. In 2019, there was a bill that was introduced that some folks called the heartbeat bill. I call it the heartless bill. Essentially, what it said was that abortion would be restricted beyond any point when cardiac activity could be detected, which amounts to about 6 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
which is oftentimes before a person knows that they're pregnant. And that there were the narrowest of exceptions
Mm-hmm.
for rape, incest,
Mm-hmm.
and life and health of the mother,
Mm-hmm.
though there were all kinds of requirements that were attached to that as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing that people don't often know about that was in that bill was that it also sought to change the definition of natural person every single place that it shows up in the Georgia Code to include a fetus in any stage of development in utero. So essentially, any law that affects a person as defined by the Georgia Code would also include a fetus. So a fetus could hold a position on a board of directors. A fetus could apply for a business license. There's all kinds of unintended consequences that would come from changing every piece of code. And the ways that that might be misconstrued, misapplied, to harm people, particularly pregnant folks with intended pregnancies, not thinking about abortion, but that the choices and ability for them to live their lives could be impacted by interpretations of this law.
And that's the part that was not put on blast.
Right. I mean, so a good example being there was a case in Alabama of a young woman who was in a physical fight, who was shot as a part of that fight. She survived the gunshot, but her pregnancy did not. And she was charged because she should not, under the prosecution, she should not have put herself in that situation because she was pregnant, a potentially dangerous situation as a pregnant person. Now, walking up and down steps is a potentially dangerous situation for a pregnant person. Driving a motor vehicle is a potentially dangerous situation for a pregnant person. Being in a room with someone who is smoking a cigarette is a potentially dangerous situation for a pregnant person. Should that person then be prosecuted and arrested? So these are the things that we have to contend with by lawmakers who want to single out abortion, but also low-key want to control the lives of people who can become pregnant.
That's what this is about control. I just don't even, so many things have nothing to do with health and well-being and all that. It's control. And I was about to say something else that probably would alienate a whole bunch of other people, but I'm gonna leave that to myself offline because I was gonna say something else, but it's about control.
Right. And those are the reasons that, you know, again, like pregnancy, abortion, fertility, miscarriage, menopause, all of these things are deeply connected to each other. It's not sort of like abortion takes up a lot of airspace, but it is one piece of this like larger reproductive spectrum of a person's life. Yes. So many of the people we see are already parenting when they decide that they want to have an abortion. Many of them go on to become parents later after an abortion. Folks have gone through multiple miscarriages. Folks are dealing with wanted pregnancies and dealing with anomalies. And then, of course, the maternal mortality crisis, people who are wanting to have healthy pregnancy outcomes and are having their health and sometimes life impacted because of, you know, a myriad of reasons, but tied back to their reproductive freedom. And so that's why we can't separate these things from each other. That's why having a conversation about abortion makes sense on Just with the Doulas, because these things are inextricably linked to each other and are happening in the same body, you know?
Body. And it just dawned on me again, your episode 5, this was not intentional. Episode 5 for season 1 was when I did the interview with Kwajalein, who is the producer of Eggs Over Easy documentary. And that's what really opened my eyes up. Like, this is not just this one, this is a full spectrum of who we are as people.
Yeah.
Right? It just don't start here, it just don't end here. There's a whole lot in between. So tell the audience, please, how to get more information about the center. I guess one on the website earlier show where you can donate. Let people know where to follow you.
Sure. So we are on many of the socials. On Instagram, we are at Feminist Center. On Twitter, we are at FWHC. On Facebook, we're FWHC Atlanta, or Feminist Women's Health Center -Atlanta, if you want to search for us. The website is feministcenter.org. We're, all over the place trying to make our mark. We, have a newsletter. So if you want to sign up to get regular updates, both political sort of advocacy related updates and volunteer opportunities or ways to stay engaged with us, you can sign up on our website to make sure that you stay in the loop. There's a calendar at the bottom, though we don't have any in-person events for a little while for reasons we're all aware of. But there are certainly ways that we are hopeful for, once the sun comes out again, for us to be able to have times to gather with folks and be together with folks so that they can stay up to date, up to speed, and with us in the trenches.
And the one part that I failed to mention, but I'm going to share this as my hope and wish for you and my prayer for you, is about the balance. And I pray that you are constantly finding ways of peace and balance for your life, because you're doing divine work. You are, bottom line. And that you take the time to rest as you're looking out for your staff, that you're looking out for Kwajelyn, which looks out for who's upstairs, who looks out. So I just pray that you do what you need to do to maintain all that you do.
I'm trying.
That is imperative to me. That's not even an option. To be able to keep going, you have to feed yourself. And I'm learning. I'm 16 years in as being a parent, and I'm really starting to get that when I feed myself, and I not just feed, but just the figurative part of that what I love and what I support automatically benefits. It's not the other way around. And we need you. We need you.
So thank you.
Thank you for being on Dish with the Doulas. And thank you, audience, for watching. I hope that you share this with everyone. And there'll be more information in the comments and tags and all that as far as the center. So thank you for joining and thank you for watching us. And we'll be back with another edition of Dish with the Doulas.